strategies I learned from the Oregon Reading Association Winter Institute. At this Winter Institute, they had the feature speakers of Kylene Beers and Robert Prost, and they were discussing their book, Reading Nonfiction. The two strategies I want to share I felt were the best ones they had because they could be used really with almost any classroom and any piece of nonfiction text with minimal prep and planning from a teacher. The first one was called Possible Sentences and was led by Kylene Beers. So before I get into the activity, I wanted to share the one piece of paperwork or worksheet that would go with it. So there's a spot here for key vocabulary. Then our first instruction, making predictions, use the words in a sentence that you think might appear in the text. Use at least 3 to 4 in each sentence, but don't try to use all the words in one sentence. The second part, modifying predictions. After reading the selection, review the sentences you wrote. If the way you used it fits with the text, simply write true. If not, revise your possible sentences to fit the text. So one thing I would advise when looking for words to use for a text, try to find words that are used more commonly than in one sentence, or pick multiple words that are seen in one sentence. So for the article, I recently went over the retirement speech Peyton Manning gave, and I borrowed this article from NPR. So here is a copy of the article that I'm using. And here's our list of words. People of his hometown of New Orleans, Indianapolis Colts, University of Tennessee, Denver Broncos, the NFL's all-time, drafted first overall, won Super Bowl 50, two-time Super Bowl, Peyton Manning. So one thing I want to point out here first is we're not just focusing on one single word, like a vocabulary term that will be essential to learning or developing their Tier 2 vocabulary. The words are more essential to understanding the article. And sometimes you can see these are not just words, they're terms related to the article. So I would give students the worksheet, show them these words, and then they create sentences up to 5, although when I did this with my advisory group or my intervention group, which mostly features students reading between a 3rd and 5th grade level, we only made maybe 3 or 4 sentences that included 2 to 3 words per sentence. Many made the connection between Peyton Manning and the NFL all-time, and him being drafted first overall. The ones they struggled more with was 1 Super Bowl 50 and 2-time Super Bowl. Those were harder to plug into multiple sentences based on these words here. So, after creating the possible sentences, we then read the article. Articles featured here. Now with my group, as we read the article, I would have them underline, highlight, mark in the text where they saw these key words of the article. Then we'd go back and modify our predictions. Essentially, this is a pre-reading strategy done before you engage fully with the text. So they're essentially practicing how they would see certain words in the text, then reading the text, they're going to realize how those words are then used. The second strategy is more of a close reading strategy that was presented by Robert Prost at the session. I have the directions here. First, the article or piece of nonfiction text is read aloud. Students follow along. Then it's read aloud, oftentimes with partners, a second time. Here, as students read, they'll mark any spot in the text where they have thoughts or questions. They're not writing anything at this point, just marking in the text. Now they'll read for a third time, quietly, silently, on their own. This time, as they read, they're going to write out questions based on those spots they marked in the text earlier. After they've read the text a third time, they'll get back with that partner, possibly a small group, and share those questions with the group. Those questions are then shared with the class. Once the teacher has gathered these questions, they can then be turned into a discussion activity. For this one, we read an article on should heading be banned from youth soccer. Here are some of the questions they came up with. Now I just put the questions in the order I received them from students. So whoever essentially finished their 3 to 4 questions first, I took their paper, wrote the questions down into this document here. And you can see here, now for discussing the questions, ideally the ones that should be easily answered should be discussed first, then move to the more challenging questions. One thing that Bob Prost did suggest is that do not go in order. And this was really beneficial considering I took the questions in order that students gave me, because students can essentially zone out or not pay attention because all questions will be coming in order. Ideally, jump around from those questions that are easier to answer to the more difficult ones to answer. So some of the easier ones that we had to answer: will heading be banned? As a class, we pretty much agreed no. Is banning heading taking away from the game? Again, mostly they felt yes, it was. Are concussions that serious? And then we did have some goofy questions too, like what's the point of soccer? Some of the better questions we have, or that would lead to better discussions, were: would learning how to head the ball correctly lead to less concussions? If they don't ban it, referring to heading, what changes will they make to make it safer? What could be done to reduce players colliding? This is probably the biggest discussion question we had. We got into a really interesting debate about one student's suggestion that defensive players should not be allowed to head the ball. They made some interesting points about how it leads to a lot more offensively based soccer, probably with a lot more scoring. But some of the soccer players in the room also advocated that this may undermine the defensive aspects of soccer and may take away from the excitement or the style of the game. So, again, these are two strategies I picked up from reading Nonfiction, a book by Kylene Beers and Robert E. Prost. They were the keynote speakers at the Oregon Reading Association Winter Institute. If you would like, I'd like to discuss some of these strategies more and maybe look at some possible ways to use them, and I could share some other ways I've used these strategies in class. We can meet in my room, room 44, on the 9th of March during our PLC time. I'd say maybe start around 3 o'clock, then go from there. All right, thanks for listening.